I've been giving a lot of thought as to whether I wanted to share a sermon that I wrote for the Brookfield Unitarian Universalist Church in January of this year, 2024. I hadn't planned on being a worship leader, but when the call was sent out by the worship committee and I saw the theme for January was liberating love, I was instantly intrigued by this concept and wondered if love could truly liberate us. So I want to take you back to what I presented back in January of 2024. As I prepared for this sermon, I went about my usual route and turned to the ancient philosophers. As many of my students will tell you, I'm fond of saying that there were 10 original ideas purported by ancient philosophers, and that everything we talk about and think about today in many ways grows out of those 10 original ideas. Everything from Socrates' know thyself to Aristotle's we are what we repeatedly do. And so, not surprisingly, I turned back to those ancient philosophers to look at what they had to say about love. In a speech given at one of Plato's symposiums, Aristophanes explained that there were three genders, male, female, and androgynous, and that each person was twice what they are now, meaning that they had 4 hands, 4 legs, 2 heads, 2 sets of genitals, and so on. They could move forward, backwards, cartwheel all around on 8 limbs. And these original beings, he thought, were very powerful and were threatening to the gods. Now, the gods did not want to outright destroy them because then they'd have to, forfeit all those human sacrifices made to them. So Zeus decided to cut each person in 2, threatening that if he didn't settle humans down, he would cut them in 2 again and they would have to hop around on 1 leg. Thus, Aristophanes purported, love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together, and it tries to make 1 out of 2 and heal the wound of human nature. Each of us, then, is a matching half of a human whole, and each of us is always seeking the half that matches him. Hence, love is simply the name for the desire and the pursuit of the whole. This notion of love as the pursuit of the whole is ingrained deeply in our consciousness and has inspired thought leaders, New Ageists, and writers, from novelists to greeting cards and screenwriters throughout the millennia. Think of Jerry Maguire's favorite line. Now, I find it amazing how much Aristophanes evokes our very modern view of love. As he depicts it, we may see love as the cure for our wound, or, as he said, the wound of human nature. So what is this wound? On the one hand, of course, Aristophanes means something quite literal, the wound perpetuated by Zeus. But on the other hand, the wound of human nature suggests so much more. Love is the most powerful emotion in the world. It can heal and transform, yet it can also enslave and divide. In an interview with Oprah Winfrey, who spoke about the power of love to liberate the human spirit, of how her mother's love liberated her to become her fullest self. Unconditional love, Angelou thought, frees a person to make their best and highest contribution to the world. Love, she said, liberates. It doesn't bind. Yet I couldn't help but wonder if love can truly liberate us. And if so, how? What is the existential mechanism for this to be possible? We are now in what may be the most contentious year our country has faced since the Civil War. And as we edge closer and closer to Election Day, November 5th, I fear that the discourse in our country will grow. That is the existential crisis I believe we face as a nation. On the human level, the personal, I can't help but wonder about those relationships that we have with loved ones, with family and friends with whom our political worldviews differ. And to be clear, I'm not talking about folks who are extremists, rather those who, for whatever reason, maintain their support for the former president. And how might these relationships survive the divisiveness? Sure, we can set up all sorts of guardrails for when we're together, topics we agree in advance that won't be discussed. Yet, does this liberate our love, or does it make it conditional? Shouldn't liberated love be free of a set of rules, be free of conditions? Mustn't love be unconditional in order to be liberated? I think for love to be liberating, we have to think of it not simply in relationship with one another, but with our relationship with ourselves. Truly understanding our relationship with ourselves requires doing a deep dive into who one is, or as Socrates said, to know thyself. It's asking oneself, what is at the heart of my character? And while there are hundreds of character traits, I think critical qualities include being honest, judicious, courageous. In fact, Aristotle thought that courage was the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees all the others. So we must ask ourselves, what are the traits that are holding me back, particularly when it comes to the political climate we are in? Am I being judgmental of those whose views differ from my own? Can I find it within my character to draw on traits I also know I have, such as objectivity and kindness and graciousness? And if honesty is a trait I value, am I willing to be exacting with myself, not just within those established guardrails, but when I am alone with my thoughts and my judgments? And that's not easy to do. I can say I'm not judgmental, but in many instances, I am not. I do think for the most part, I exercise good judgment, in meaning I have the ability to make objective decisions or come to sensible conclusions. Yet, to be honest, when it comes to the former president and the extreme MAGA worldview, I've hurled many a judgmental statement at television commentators. And if I'm truly honest with myself, when I hear someone I know say or write something similar, then I have to be willing to admit that at times I've thought, how the blank can you support that idiot? Judgmental. So the question remains, can love be both liberating and conditional? In the reading I shared with the congregation, written by Reverend Partain, he wrote, "We need to receive love just as deeply as we need to express love. It's important for us to have a commitment to self-care and to tend to our own needs." He also stated that he, quote, defined love as an active commitment to the well-being of another. So how do we walk that line between a commitment to self-care and tending to our own needs while engaging in the active commitment to the well-being of another with whom we so strongly disagree? In Aristotle's Poetics, he explained the why of how the most effective tragedies rely on complication and resolution. He thought that, and I quote, "a probable impossibility is to be preferred to a thing improbable and yet possible." Now, I first came across this rather perplexing idea as an undergraduate philosophy major during an aesthetics class. And I recall asking Professor Jaffe something to the effect, what the heck is a probable impossibility? And how could something that's impossible be probable? And why, I further challenged him, would a probable impossibility be preferred to an improbable possibility? And as I recall, Professor Jaffe responded something to the effect, why get fixated on that one statement? Read further, ponder further. Which, by the way, is a typical philosophy teacher's response. But when I got to this line, if he, meaning the poet, describes the impossible, he is guilty of an error. But the error may be justified if in the end of the art be thereby attained. It was here that I had my first level understanding as to the veracity of these two assertions. Now, I am not a poet, nor do I have the capacity to be one. However, as a writer, I know how you can put a character in impossible situations. It's one way we make the story compelling, raising the fundamental question, how will the protagonist possibly prevail? Rational logic tells us that they cannot succeed. Yet the rule of emotional logic found in story almost always means they will prevail. And in the end, when they do succeed, despite the impossible circumstances, we, the reader, are satisfied because it is what we want for them. It tells us that strongly held, differing political opinions are impossible circumstances to bridge emotional logic. That is, our love for these people in our lives makes the impossible probability possible that we can find a way to bridge that divide. So, how do we get there? What will guide us forward, what must guide us forward, is to focus on the resilience capacity. Resilience is not a trait that people either have or do not have. Rather, resilience involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. Among the dozens of skills and attitudes of resilience are being connected to others, being flexible and optimistic, being able to communicate well with others, and problem solve, both individually and with others, and being able to effectively manage one's feelings and impulses and develop good communication skills. So rather than establishing rules as to what we won't talk about, perhaps what we need to establish to clarify are the rules of effective communication. Because as Epictetus wrote, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Listening is an essential part of effective communication. And listening is different from hearing. Listening really is harder than we think. And while I am sure many of you are, for the most part, listening to what I am saying today, I am equally sure that there are some who are, at times today, just hearing it. Because minds wander and we begin to think about other things we need to do. We're wondering, how much longer is she going to talk? All the usual and typical distractions. Active listening can be described as an attitude that leads to shared understanding. It enhances our capacity for understanding and empathy. Because when we listen to what another is saying, when we focus on what is being said, we begin to see the world through their viewpoint. And when we make the effort to learn from one another, it can stimulate new thinking and help us move beyond one-sided arguments on a divisive topic. It can also reveal areas of agreement that may not have previously been apparent, and even identify a set of shared principles that we can agree on. There may be people we love and who love us with whom we can start this dialogue, who want to have this conversation. And while I think it is important to agree to disagree, I do think we have to be honest brokers. If each of us has information we believe supports our point of view, then be willing to explore the other's information and be willing to ask clarifying questions such as, why does that make sense to you? And listen without judgment. We may not experience a changing of minds, and that's not the point. The point is to liberate us, to be accepting of the other based on understanding and without judgment. In doing so, we allow our resilience capacity for connectedness to flourish. Connectedness is thought to be one of the 6 basic human needs, and love has the power to create a deep sense of connection. So if we are willing to do the deep dive of self-examination, to recognize and acknowledge our character foibles, and do the honest work necessary to overcome them, and open our hearts fully to love another without judgment, then I do think love can truly liberate us. Thank you for listening.